So let's start with The Rider. This is Chloé Zhao's second film, though you probably missed her first film. So Chloé Zhao's previous film came out a couple years ago, Songs My Brother Taught Me. And it deals with the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. And it kind of deals with the struggles of these Lakota Sioux siblings, dealing with the poverty and various different addiction issues that is common on the Indian reservation. It was very interesting seeing, a Chinese national's representation of the state of indigenous peoples in America. It premiered very, very well at the 2015 Cannes Film Festival.
It's kind of ridiculous almost. This woman born in Beijing, went to school in London, moved to Los Angeles, and now has made two very evocative films set in North Midwest.
Yeah, both in South Dakota.
Right. That's definitely an interesting geographical tack.
And she really brings a unique image to kind of the state of the Midwestern American experience.
Yeah, a very distinct vision of, I think, alienation that the sort of isolation of the land brings out in you.
And just like forgotten lands.
Right.
So this film, The Rider, is her second film. It premiered at the 2017 Cannes Film Festival. Unfortunately, I did not get to see it while I was there. But yeah, it took the Art Cinema Award at Cannes, and it got immediately snapped up by Sony Picture Classics, and they gave it a incredibly limited release in April this year.
Yeah, it got snapped up, and they haven't really done anything with it since.
I think it was New York and LA only, but it was real fast.
Mm-hmm.
And in the US, it's hitting DVD and streaming services on August 7th. There is no Blu-ray release, so if you want a really high-quality version, I'd say grab it on Amazon Video. And international people are up a creek because there is no international distribution lined up for this.
It's really a shame, that Sony has kind of left it out to dry so much.
It's not Sony's fault. They only bought US rights.
Oh, well, right, sure. But even for the US, I would love to have this in my collection. And on Blu-ray, it's such a pretty film.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of going to continue to see indie films just slowly die on physical media.
Well, my hope is that little places or, little indie studios and distributors like Draft House, like A24, can pick up some of the slack. A24
little indie distributors like A24, who's
when I say little indie, I mean like big indie, little AAA.
Yeah.
Is that a game? That's an only gaming term, or I don't know what they little blockbuster studios.
Mini majors.
Yeah, mini major. A24 has just had a string of great releases.
That's one thing. Before we get too off topic, I don't understand how people are like, yeah, A24 only puts out good movies.
Oh, they don't.
I'm like, have you seen some of their minor releases? Yeah. I watched How to Talk to Girls at Parties the other day. That film is terrible.
Yeah, they've got plenty of trash too, but it's all very distinct.
Yeah, they got a style going on. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and I'm very much a fan of having the fact if they have all these high profile releases that are really good, and then they also got a lot of little not that great movies. I'm very much okay with that. I think it's a reality of releasing independent film, and I would rather see it somewhere than not at all.
Well, and it's good that people are taking the time to pick these films up and release them.
Right, exactly.
I kind of would like to see how a film like The Rider would be handled by someone like Bleecker Street or A24, and instead of, the independent label of one of the majors, where it's just kind of been forgotten.
Yeah, it's just going to languish.
But this film has been very well received. It has a 97% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 94% on Metacritic. Before we get into the plot too much, I think one of the most interesting things is its use not only of amateur actors, which is something we talked about when we were talking about Ratcatcher last week.
Right.
But the fact that they're playing essentially exaggerated versions of themselves.
Yeah. So the film was about Brady, who lives with his father and younger autistic sister, and was once upon a time a rodeo star, but fell literally off the horse and ended up with brain damage. And that's been kind of plaguing him ever since, and has been coloring his decision of what to even make of his life now.
Yeah.
It's a very freeform film in that it features characters that flit in and out of his life very naturalistically, and it illustrates sort of his pressing decision of what am I going to make of myself when I am surrounded by people who have either left doing what they loved, which was riding horses, or continued doing it and ultimately destroyed their bodies. To that point, he has a friend with severe brain damage. On the other side, his dad is kind of a languishing alcoholic who stopped riding, and he never wants to be like him.
Yeah, and, he didn't get the injury from riding horses. It was from bull riding, but...
Right.
I think one of the biggest things is he's someone at a crossroads because he's forced to reinvent himself, and he's not quite sure how.
One of the really important visualizations of the film, and I think very illustrative of its central theme, is the isolation of the Badlands. Because it's such a barren, literal wasteland, these characters, and Brady in particular, are forced really onto the track of being a rodeo star. It's what he loves, partially because it's really only what he knows. He does have a natural talent for it, and we kind of see that with scenes of him breaking horses and just the true, genuine love he has for the animals. But the reality is,
it's killing him.
Yeah, it's killing him, and it's not like he really ever had a choice. The film doesn't explicitly talk a whole lot about the economic conditions that are underpinning that.
That's kind of my big issue with this film, and I really liked it. It's a very pretty film. Mm-hmm. It feels like there's a massive elephant in the room that we never really explicitly talk about. There's references to, they're going to lose their trail or whatever, but it never explicitly talks about the economic conditions. And it never addresses the fact that, they're living on a reservation.
Part of that, I think, is it's a very subdued narrative. It's very much told via environment.
And I get that. It just feels like an omission.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do agree. I'm never one to be grumpy that class issues get brought up in film. It's one of my favorite themes is classism in films.
And it's implied, but I just feel like it doesn't confront why all these people are kind of stuck in their own path without many options available to them.
I think it might even be somewhat intentional, because I don't think, to bring it even back to the last episode where we were talking about Ratcatcher and sort of lack of broader understanding about one's class and situation, I don't know how much Brady knows about opportunities outside of South Dakota.
Yeah.
There's this one scene where he goes to the pawn shop to pawn off his saddle because he's realized that he needs to stop riding or else it will kill him. He just kind of almost gets a lesson from the pawn shop cashier or the pawn shop clerk. And the clerk talks about, we see guys come in here and eventually you got to stop riding. And he's surrounded by all this other stuff that's been pawned off. But it's one of the most colorful and interpersonal scenes in the film, I feel like. It's one of the scenes in the film that feels most out of the location. Those scenes and the scenes in the general store where Brady's briefly working to try to make some money while he's recovering, because they illustrate that outside, the closest you can get to outside of this.
And it's normalizing.
Right.
I think one of the big things is also just that entire scene you mentioned at the pawn shop is reflective not only of reinventing himself and giving up riding, but also the revelation that he's not going to be his father because he has a choice. He can choose what he wants to do there.
Did we get an explanation exactly for...
I just kind of took it as he was washed up.
Yeah, his father is just, kind of an alcoholic and a gambler, but we don't really know exactly what caused him to stop.
No, it's tough on your body. Quite frankly, Brady probably wouldn't have had that much of a career left.
Yeah,
he's what, 19, 20? Get another 5 years in there, your body's going to fall apart on you.
If not sooner, just with the traumatic brain injury. He barely has control over his muscles in his right hand.
This film deals with neurodivergence a lot between the sister who's autistic and played by herself, which is really a fascinating portrayal.
Yeah, it was actually a heavily improvised role. They pretty much just, let her live herself, which I think is a fascinating approach to it.
But you also have almost every one of his friends presents in a way that suggests that they're also neurodivergent. You have to wonder
either
how many of these kids have had traumatic brain injuries or concussions or, something from riding.
Right.
Or just lack of education. It really sets an interesting tone.
I think It does. I mean, it certainly illustrates almost a difficulty Brady has with communicating even with them. Certainly, it seems like he's relatively neurotypical as far as we can tell. I mean, he certainly sees.
I think he's definitely more lyrical than the rest of the people show.
Right. I mean, he loves his sister very dearly, so he is closely.
He has a vision.
Yeah. He is able to comprehend the reality a little bit more than I think other people are of the trauma that this is even causing on themselves and options outside of them.
He still makes the choices to go and ride when he shouldn't. He still, is choosing based on his gut rather than actual informed advice.
I mean, he still breaks horses, which is itself
Incredibly
dangerous. Because, yeah, I mean, it's what he knows and what he loves. I mean, his father Wayne says several times, that he is as stubborn as his late mother.
Mm-hmm.
I think the lack of his, the loss of his mother is a pretty central vacuum in the story. I think it highlights some of the difficulties that come from a single parent household.
The family dynamic in general is very interesting.
Yeah, it's I don't want to say it's all stretched thin, but I think that's really what it is.
And a lot of people are acting outside of their comfort zone.
Right. Wayne doesn't really bring in a lot of money to like support the family to the point where he actually, sells Brady's horse to be able to afford to pay to live in their trailer.
And he's a compulsive gambler, which that kind of explains destructive habits.
Right.
But at the same time, he's trying to support Lily.
Right. He does. Yeah.
He's trying to help her, transition into adulthood, which how productive that is questionable. But
I mean, how productive it even could be. There's a degree to which
she's resistant because I think she's happy.
Yeah.
And I think she's the only character who's actually happy.
I would say she's the only character who doesn't seem to want something out of her reach.
Yep.
And I mean, many of my favorite scenes involved her and her sort of just complete comfort.
Yeah.
And it was always nice to see
that contrast.
Yeah, Brady kind of having to struggle with how to protect her, knowing that she, is really going to go her own way no matter what.
And I think the visual language of this film is really its strongest asset. Like, this is territory we've tread many times in film. You have films like Nebraska from a couple of years ago. You have films like, obviously, we're going to talk about Terrence Malick's Badlands. Mm-hmm. But just the vast expanse that this film sets.
Yeah.
And, it's shot in scope, and it's just huge. Like, you get the feeling of how isolated and cut off they are at every moment. And I think that's really the visual language. This is a fairly languid film. It's not an easy watch as far as accessibility, but I think everyone will get something out of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to be in sheer awe of how, not empty it is, but just how expansive it is. Like you said, it's such a wonder to see that nature and man's insignificance and sheer tininess against it.
It's just a wasteland.
I mean, much like Malick, like you said, we're going to get into that with Badlands. It tells a very lyrical story of the geographical reality that forces the characters into the situation that they are in.
And not only that, but, also like Malick, it's about misfits. It's about misfits who don't quite have a meaning for their life. Brady thought he had it, and then it's taken away from him. And it's trying to reposition yourself and find that meaning, which I think that's a core struggle for almost everyone.
It's a little bit of a subversion of the American dream.
Oh, totally.
Where, I mean, I say a little bit only because they're not really concerned about getting rich as much as it is defining yourself through your occupation and through this sort of American-centric lens of I am what I do. And realizing that what I do is highly destructive to my body, and if I want to be what I do, I'm not going to be much longer.
Yeah.
We see that a lot with Lane, who suffered severe brain damage from a similar accident to Brady, and we see a lot of that mirror. Brady is looking into his friend, and he sees so much of himself, but he also sees his continued ability to speak with them through sign language. I mean, he lost so much brain function that he can't even speak.
But he's still there.
Right, he's still there, and he still has that human connection that he had with Lane. And I think that's a big part of the struggle is pulling out that part of their relationship and knowing that the central parts of their souls and their being are still there, despite that horrible, destruction that's been done to the body.
Yeah, so that's The Rider. It's really good.
Yeah, I mean, I quite enjoyed it. I do want to check out Chloe Zhao's first film now, although it was a little bit less well received, but I still...
This is an incredible new auteur director that everyone should be checking out. Yeah. I'm sure it's going to be on awards lists at the end of the year, probably not the big ones. This was nominated for 4 Independent Spirit Awards last year, and it didn't win any of them, but, it was nominated for Best Feature, Best Director, Best Editing, and Best Cinematography. So it had good play with the awards. I don't know which awards it's eligible for this year because, like I said, it premiered at Cannes last year, but had an American theatrical release this year. So we'll see if the Academy looks at it.
Yeah, I mean, I just hope more people can see it. Like we said, because it's such a limited release, you're pretty much you're gonna have to watch it on on VOD if you want to see it. It looks like.
Yeah, which that's a real shame because this film looks gorgeous in scope and should be projected.